it's better if I stand up. Well, probably some people wonder why a chimpanzee lady is involved in genetically modified or genetically engineered crops. And I was checking the date. 2004, Harvest for Hope was published with a whole chapter on genetically modified food. And then just last year, Seeds of Hope has another whole chapter kind of bringing the thing up to date, which Steve was kind enough to look through. And so I know that if his book is accurate, which it is, then my chapter in Seeds of Hope is as well. So why did I get into this? Because, I left Gombe in 1986, left being full-time researcher, to really try and help the chimpanzees who were losing their forests and who were being hunted, which took me traveling around Africa, which brought me face to face with some of the problems faced by the African people as well as by chimpanzees and other animals, which took me traveling around Europe and North America and then increasingly Asia, Latin America, the Middle East, and learning about the various problems faced by the environment and our future. And genetically engineered crops came into my life because I kept meeting people who were, as Steve says, it's very divisive, and I kept meeting people who were explaining to me something about the faulty science, which is explained much better than they did in your book, I have to say. And so I became interested, and my interest has centered more on the effects on the environment. And I know some organic farmers, and the fact that when the pollen from genetically engineered crops is blown by the wind onto an organic farm, they lose their organic status. And knowing people who have gone into these fights, they seldom win. They usually, these fights by the organic farmers are usually settled out of court because farmers can't afford to battle, particularly Monsanto. And so they lose their livelihood and they're gagged. If they settle out of court, you can't ever say anything of the facts that you discovered on your farm. So that's all hushed up nicely. And then, right at the beginning, it was pretty obvious that when you create a crop with toxins in it to repel the insects, which is what Monsanto did with its BT corn, that's the insect. Is that the one which repels insects, BT corn?
Creates its own insecticide.
Yes, right, creates its own insecticide. And there are various other crops now with this gene inserted. It was pretty obvious that insects would become resistant. And of course they have. So we get so-called superbugs, which can happily munch up on these crops. And so not only do you have a plant with toxic genes in every cell from the seed to the fruit, which goodness knows what that's doing to the environment when crops are left, their roots in the ground and so forth, in addition to our bodies. But in addition to that, these crops are affecting not just the pest insects, but other insects as well. And this seemed to me to be very disturbing. I remember reading about monarch butterfly caterpillars that were not developing and actually dying when they were eating leaves that were dusted with pollen from this BT corn. And then there's the herbicide, the famous Monsanto Roundup Ready, which is the most commonly used herbicide in the world, and it has, what's the chemical in it?
Glyphosate.
Say it again.
Glyphosate, the active ingredient in
Yes.
Glyphosate.
Glyphosate, okay, it's got glyphosate in it. And same thing, some of the weeds that Roundup is designed to kill become resistant. And I got really fascinated talking to and reading about some of the farmers who are in despair. And one of them said, this is the worst threat to agriculture in my lifetime, because there's one particular plant called a pigweed. And normally it grows about this high. It's one of the agricultural weeds. It's now growing to 7 foot. And some of them have such thick stems that they're actually destroying the machinery used to try and harvest the crops, and farmers can't harvest anymore. That's just one example. So the answer to this, the answer from the big companies, well, now farmers, you have to use a cocktail of herbicides. And the main ingredient of this cocktail was the main ingredient of Agent Orange. And if that doesn't send a chill down your spine, I don't know what does. And so, this led me into considering more about the effect on the animals. And Steve's talked about the experiments on rats by push dye. And I read about that. I wrote about it in Harvest for Hope about 20 years ago. 2004, and I was very shocked. The same thing happening to him as the farmers who were losing their livelihood. In fact, he had 2 heart attacks, which some people say is probably the direct result of the harassment or the stress that he went through to try and get his research published. And then Seralini. Seralini is the French scientist who was concerned about genetically engineered foods and their safety. And he said to himself, well, when tests are done on animals, the standard length is 3 months. But we know from DDT was safe, it was wonderful, it was a gift to the environment, it wouldn't hurt animals, it wouldn't hurt us. It was only the long-term cumulative effect that showed how bad it was. And that was what Rachel Carson devoted her life to, with Silent Spring, and she was right, even though she was poo-pooed and held down, and that probably triggered her cancer. But anyway, so he subjected his rats, instead of to 3 months, his poor rats were subjected to 2 years of feeding on genetically modified corn or soy or whatever it was. And in a way, it was cruel, because the rats who were fed on these GM crops developed the most hideous tumors and other nasty things. Well, okay, so you're a rat in a lab and you're fed an unnatural amount of food, so that can't bother us, can it? They should wipe that all away. But then there's some interesting information about pigs. Pigs have internal organs much more like ours. Rats really aren't much the same at all. But pigs are often used as experimental animals for testing various drugs because they're so surprisingly like us. And there was a Dutch farmer, and his pigs were getting diarrhea, they were having reproductive problems, and various other ways they were not doing well. And he decided in desperation to take them off genetically modified food. And within 2 days, the diarrhea stopped, and then the breeding began to get better. So, of course, this wasn't science. But a woman decided that she would do an experiment on pigs, the kind of pigs that we eat. We don't eat rats, we do eat pigs. So these were commercial pigs that were fed on GM grain, whatever it was. And so she got this hog farm. This was a normal commercial enterprise. She got them to put 20 of the pigs on a different diet, which was not containing any GM substances. And they're slaughtered, I think it's about 22 weeks of age. And so what she did was to, with their permission, was to take all of the internal organs from the GM normal fed pigs and her research group. Okay, that's only 20 pigs, well, 40 altogether. So maybe you can't say too much, but she found damage to kidneys and liver and various other things in the pigs that are being fed GM food versus her pigs. So the evidence, if you look through it, and it's also true that somebody has reviewed all of the different animal experimentations and the results that were deduced. And where the results said, oh, there's nothing wrong, these are just very small defects, the food's perfectly safe, those were the ones that were perpetrated by the people involved in the research or in some way connected with GM crops. And the ones that are saying, hey, wait a minute, we've got problems with livers, we've got problems with kidneys, we've got reproductive problems and various other things, those are done by the independent scientists. So those were the reasons that, and one of the things, Steve, and Richard too, I guess, which had me really puzzled about the science of it is this thing that's called substantial equivalence. And the substantial equivalence is kind of bizarre. So if you're manufacturing a GM crop and you want to prove that it's absolutely safe, you prove, in quotes, that it's substantially equivalent to the non-genetically modified commercially grown crop. But if you want to patent it, then you prove that it's substantially not equivalent. Does this make sense? Is it just me? It's like Alice in Wonderland. So this was the thing that really got me about the science. Steve's book goes in great detail into all the different ways in which these crops are so unscientifically modified in this way. But I have said in my introduction to his book that I believe he deserves a Nobel Prize. He's devoted, 10 years of your life to this?
About 18.
18 years, all right, 18. Yes, from when you started. When did you tackle USDA?
I began the law in 1996.
1996 is when he began. And, I only met Steve, I think, 3 years ago. But he's been completely immersed in this. And I said, Steve, do you sometimes feel a bit nervous? And he said, well, I try not to go down a dark alleyway at night. And okay, you think that's a joke. Percy Schmeiser, who was the organic farmer who dared to challenge Monsanto, and he challenged them for 2 years, and he sort of won. And he was going through this very long law case. I think it took, I don't know how long it took, I can't remember, but it was many months. And it was going on very late one night, and he had a long phone call, and so it was dark when he left. And one of the Monsanto people came up beside him and said, you'll never win, we'll take you out. So I spend a lot of my time working with young people, with children. We have a program called Roots and Shoots, which is now in 139 countries, and it's kindergarten through university. And so a lot of what I do, all that I'm learning about the harm we've inflicted on this planet is, I look at a child and I think how we've harmed this world since I was that age. And it's shocking, and it makes me ashamed of being human. And the strange thing is, I spent all those years studying chimpanzees, and they're more like us than any other creature. 98% or more of our composition of our DNA we share with chimpanzees, and the immune system, and the composition of the blood, and the anatomy of the brain. It's just so like ours. So what's the big difference? The explosive development of our intellect. We've sent a rocket up to Mars, hundreds of thousands of miles away in space, and a little robot crawled out, and it's creeping about, and it's taking photographs of science on Earth to see. That dwarfs the intellect of even the brightest chimpanzee, and they're much brighter than we used to think. And so how is it possible that the most intellectual creature who's ever walked the planet is destroying its only home? And how is it possible that the industry, the GM or the GE industry, has managed to fool so many people? Is it just money? Are we so worshipping at the altar of money that we become subverted and don't think straight? Is that what's happened? I don't know, but that's the big question. But hopefully your book will open people's eyes and sweep away some of the musty, fusty cobwebs, and maybe, like the little robot crawling around on Mars, help people to see with a clearer vision.
Okay, I think what we can do.